I want to thank you also for the opportunity to be able to speak with you today and to talk with you about the next step. After you've learned how to grow cherries in such abundance, you have to know what to do with them. And I know that a lot of you are here in different stages of your adventure with cherries. I hope that you will see it as an adventure, and that some of you are just now planting your first trees. Some of you have trees that are just now coming into production, and some of you have been producing cherries for several years. So I hope this meets some needs that any of you may have that you do not understand what you're getting yourselves into, or you've been packing or harvesting fruit and not finding it going well and finding problems. And so I hope there's something for you in this talk that will benefit you. We're going to be looking at several topics of discussion. Best harvest practice for maintaining fruit quality. This is dealing with the actual picking of the fruit. The next one will be on preserving cherry quality in the orchard after harvest. You need to know what to do with your fruit in that time after you've picked it, but before you move it. It needs to be protected. And then the transportation from orchard to holding facility, how to do that in the best possible timing and way. And then we'll be looking at 3 methods of pre-cooling your fruit. First of all, this may seem pretty obvious. Cherries are not apples, but people tend to think that they can handle cherries the way that they've handled apples if they've been an apple grower. And I like to think with cherries, it's like you've hit the fast play button on your DVD player. Everything is speeded up in comparison to apples. Cherries have a very short time that the fruit is at a good maturity level, 2 to 4 days. With apples, you've got 2 to 4 weeks, or weeks to think about when you're going to get that fruit off the tree. But a cherry variety does not maintain its good quality for very long. Then you have a 4-hour delivery time from the orchard, max, and that's only if you are protecting your cherries in the orchard. Otherwise, you need to get them out of the orchard within an hour or 2. And then you go to immediate cooling at your holding facility. Cherries, we know, do have a short season in the market. That's what makes them kind of a luxury item and why they charge higher prices. They're not available all year round everywhere, unless, of course, you can import them, but even then, you don't have cherries in the market all the time. Apples are around all the time. They're not always great apples, but you can find apples. But just for you to remember this, think of this always, cherries have to be handled in a matter of hours as compared to apples. It's a big thing to remember. Okay, this is another thing that people don't know or they forget. That once the cherry is removed from the tree, that is the best that cherry will ever be. You'll never improve it by how you handle it in post-harvest. It begins to decay or deteriorate from the moment it is detached from the tree. They do not have a storage of carbohydrates within them. They're not going to get any sweeter. You cannot do anything to improve that quality. So make sure that you're waiting until it has achieved a good quality, because it's not going to ripen. If you don't pick it at a ripe stage, it will not get any riper. They deteriorate because of what's going on inside of the cherry, which is respiration. And that's oxygen is taken in and CO2 is given off. It's still a living organism, and it's releasing energy which produces heat. And that heat is the problem, and we're going to be fighting that heat the whole time during your handling and harvesting process. So our big goal is to slow down this deterioration process. It's considered an aging process. We're all going through aging. We all wish we knew how to slow down aging. Well, we know how to slow it down with cherries as much as we can, and you will find that as we go on. We'll talk about some factors that affect the post-harvest quality of cherries. These are, the main things are crop load. Lynn mentioned that a bit. We'll just review that briefly. The proper harvest timing, the mechanical injury due to improper handling, internal changes due to respiration that we just mentioned, moisture loss caused by humidity imbalance, and then decay caused by infection of pathogens. The first one, as Lynn mentioned, this is a big problem in the quality at harvest time, is if you find that your trees have been overset. If you haven't handled them right during your growing and they're overset, it will definitely affect your fruit quality. You'll have, in the middle you can see the overset tree, and as Lynn noted, you need 5 leaves for every fruit on that tree in order for it to have good quality. That's kind of hard to imagine. I never realized that myself and thought about that. That if you don't have that energy being produced by those leaves, you're not going to have a good quality tree. And so you have that fruit to leaf ratio is way out of balance here. And so none of the cherries are going to have enough sugar to be worth, they're not going to have more than 15 bricks of sugar probably. They're going to be small size, 20 millimeters or less. And they're going to be, small cherries always damage more easily than large cherries. And so you need to ask yourself, as you're looking at your orchard, if you have any overset cherries, overset trees, you need to ask yourself, is this worth harvesting? Do you have a market for that fruit? Is anyone going to buy that fruit? Do you want to invest in the cost of pickers for picking a fruit that's not going to be worth anything? And so maybe you have to make an early decision right off the bat that you're going to skip trees that are overset. Come and clean them up after you've harvested trees that have cherries worth harvesting. When do you harvest? That's always a big question. And the factors that you use to determine when to harvest is based on the color of the fruit and the skin color and flesh color, the taste, and the size potential. Here it's really important to know your varieties. Know what their optimum color is supposed to be. As you can see, 2 different varieties here. Some are going to be on the redder side, some are going to be on the more mahogany side. You need to know that. You can find that out by looking at various websites, by going online, looking at different researchers, what they share. But you can go to hopefully you can go to your nurseryman and that they can give you information. Or even look for the breeding program. They always have pamphlets on the cherries, their cherry varieties that they've produced, and get that information. Here is how you would look at skin color and flesh color. Skin color always precedes flesh color, meaning that your skin color is going to turn darker before the interior of the fruit. And then what you need to know is a lot of flesh color, there will be a dark cherry, dark skin color, but the flesh is not going to get that dark. It is genetically a lighter skin color. And so you have to prepare yourself to know that. The fruit inside, the flesh color darkens from the pit out. As you can see, it's a little darker there, and it gets a little darker as it ripens. But this is Samba, and that's the darkest that flesh is going to get internally. But the outside is a very dark fruit. We use, the CTIFL color card is what is used by most research places as a standard, and so if they refer to a color, it's probably from that color card series. I don't know, I had one here, but I don't know where I laid it. But anyway, you can see it in this next picture, what it looks like. Oh, no, it'll be the next picture. But the other thing that affects when to harvest is taste. That's kind of a subjective thing. People vary in what taste they like. Marketers have preferred flavors that they like, depending on where you're raising your cherries. There's cultural differences in what flavors are preferred. So you need to know that, but taste is an interaction of the soluble solids content, which is the sugars, and then the titratable acidity of the fruit. The soluble solids can be measured with a refractometer. You can use either this digital kind or an analog kind, but the preferred reading is that it reaches a level of 17 to 22 bricks. I would suggest when you go in your orchard, you're checking for sugar levels, don't just take 1 or 2 cherries. get at least a handful from a tree and then smush them in a bag and then extract the juice from the bag onto the refractometer. So you don't just have one cherry determining what the whole tree is. That's not a very good way to do it. Here's the color card. It's one of these in the circle one. The color cards, according to CTIFL colors, are 4, 5, and 6. They are an acceptable range for the color when you harvest. There are some cherries that still remain quite firm when they get to be a dark 7, but that's starting to get a little bit on the risky side if you wait until it gets to a 7, because usually when a cherry starts to get that dark, it's starting to complete that aging process, and it's going to be losing its firmness. At the lower end, though, you don't want to go too low, because then like at the 4, the flavor of anything in the 4s does not last very long. It's not a very good flavor. It's not the best marketing scheme to use to go that low. When you have determined that you have the right color, if you're lucky enough that you can have a small enough orchard that you can go through and color pick, then you can make several passes through your orchard and just pick when the color is at its peak, when it's at its best place. Unfortunately, well, for us, our orchards are so large that we can't go through an orchard more than once. Everything gets picked at the same time, and then all of the stuff that's not good is just taken out as culls. So, but if you have the opportunity to color pick, you'll have a good chance of really focusing on the best cherries that you have at a time, and then go through again as more of them ripen to that stage. Because very few of them all ripen at the same time. So you need to be managing it that way. Once you have that fruit quality pick, though, you have to be very aware of the weather for your harvesting. If you look and you see that there's a string of days of hot weather coming, say like 4 days, where it's going to be above 32, you need to harvest before that starts. Because if fruit goes through 4 days of heat, it's going to it will be losing its flavor really fast, and its quality is going to go down as you take it on into the processing process. Also, if there's rain in the forecast, you probably want to get that fruit off so that you don't lose it to cracking. So once you determine when you want to harvest, be sure that you're checking the weather. You don't want to harvest any sooner than you have to, though, because when you harvest too early, you're giving up on size. Size translates into weight, and weight is what pays you, right? How much weight you're harvesting. And so don't sacrifice that without a good reason. Okay, now we're going to look at how to harvest. And we're going to recognize that one of the big things is that 50% of the defects that are found in cherries after they've gone through the packing process is caused by mishandling by pickers in the orchard. So it's very important that you think of how to train your pickers, how to use proper picking containers, and how you avoid damaging the fruit. Because if that fruit arrives in the marketplace or to the final destination and it has all this damage, then you're going to have to pay for the adjustments. But these things all happened to your fruit before they left your orchard. Here's some picking containers. There are different things that are good about all of them and some things that are not so good about them. The very far left one, it's not what I would call my best choice, because for one thing it is dark colored. And what we're finding through the whole process of handling your fruit is controlling temperature, keeping the cherries from heating up. Dark containers absorb the heat, so that's going to cause your cherries to be kept warmer. They need to be, as you can see, other options are white colored containers, which will reflect the heat so that it's not affecting the heat of your cherries, not adding to their problem that's being caused by the respiration. Also, the cherry container on the left, If it's not made with a good quality of plastic, I'm sure there's grades of plastic that you can be used in that. If it's poor quality plastic, those edges are not smooth, and the cherries get damaged as they travel around in those crates. In the middle one, as you can see, he's got the kind with a drop down. Oh, the one good thing about that, though, is that you can put that kind of crate through a hydro cooler. But in these other two kinds, which I'm more familiar with because this is what we use in the Northwest, you have to dump that container into a larger bin before it's processed. But the middle one, you can drop it from the bottom. It's going into a soft container, so it's not getting marked there. And then he can release the cloth bottom, and it drops the cherries into the bigger container without a dumping motion. This person has to dump theirs into a larger container, and they have to do that very carefully so that the cherries are not marked. But this one here is good because it matches the shape of the body. It's a kidney shape. You use a harness so that you can hold it. Same with the guy in the middle. And that's important because you need to really have two hands to harvest cherries very well. So also they are smooth interiors, but on both of these, this one and the black one, what you can use and which we recommend is that you line them with bubble wrap, a thin sheet of bubble wrap, which also protects the cherries when they're being dropped into the buckets. So that's something you might think about. The Canadians have developed a really good way to train your pickers and how to pick. It is a learned skill. It's something everybody could learn if they wanted to take the time and practice doing it right. It teaches you how to have your pickers move ladders if you're using ladders, how to set them for the safety of the picker and for the health of the tree, because trees could get damaged if ladders are not placed properly. And then, most importantly, it teaches proper picking techniques. Not everybody knows intuitively how to pick cherries, but you have to, there's a motion where you have to lift and twist, lift and twist, lift and twist. It gets the cherries removed. You never touch the fruit. You only touch the stems, and then it removes them without damaging the spurs, because you will find that inexperienced pickers are really ruining your next year's crop as they are breaking off spurs while they're harvesting this season's crop. So you really want to take some time to train your pickers. As Lynn talked about pitting, it's caused by dropping cherries, and short drops decrease the pitting. So you shouldn't be dropping your cherries from any further distance than the top edge of the picking container. And then you're actually more or less kind of letting them roll off your hand into the bucket. And then these small sunken areas, as Lynn showed you, they appear, but they don't appear until at least 2 to 3 days, sometimes even up to 10 days after the damage has occurred. So it's really hard to know that it's happening unless you see it at the end, and then you're having to pay for it at that end. Another very common picker damage is when they do try to pull the cherry down rather than lift it up and twist it off. You get shoulder bruising. That's very easily recognized as picker damage. It's a compression bruise on the cherries, and it causes the cherry to heat up. Anytime there's damage to the cherry, it's caused respiration to occur even faster, which means even more warming up the cherry. The thing that we're fighting against the whole time is warming, and so you have to change these practices in order to keep that from happening. The other thing that happens a lot is fingernail breaks in the cherries when you're picking. You can find those on cherries quite often. If you have someone that's looking through what, every once in a while checking how a picker is doing, see what they're doing. If you're finding fingernail breaks in the skin, that is not good because it gives an avenue for disease to enter. And so, inoculation from some of the fungal diseases can enter in through the breaks that are in the skin. And so that's something you definitely want to avoid. Now here I'm going to show you the video that you've all been anxiously waiting to see. These pickers pick the cherries. You notice how it helps to have both hands free. You can keep a branch aside while the other hand is picking, and then you never have to stop that motion. I don't think any of us ever want to get into a competition with any of these pickers, because we're not going to win. But they had to learn how to do that. They have trained and developed, and they do this for 8 to 10 hours a day. They're excellent hard workers.
But they don't pick it one by one?
No, you pick the cluster. Because you can twist that. You can pick one by one if it's a single cherry, but if it's in a cluster, you pick it. And I forgot to mention that if it's a long cluster of cherries, in order to keep the cherries from being damaged, you start at the top. Don't start at the bottom. That's going to damage the cherries going up. Start at the top, work your way down. They call it unzipping. Just work your way down the cluster, and then you can pick off like a two cherry cluster, a 3 cherry cluster, but work your way down. And that also maintains the quality of the cherries.
Somebody else needs to separate them after.
Well, it depends on what your plan is. If you're going to do it at a commercial processor where they have a cluster cutter, that will separate it. Or you can separate them by hand too, if you're going to size them. It just depends on what your needs are. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now that seems exhausting to all of us, we'll go on. And so what happens, sometimes a harvest has been interrupted by rain, and they're still going to try to save some of the crop. So here a picker is going to be picking the fruit, and he has to pick it slower because the grower has asked him to sort the fruit in his picking process. Just to let you know, the stuff that you see on the cherries is sulfur that has been applied to stop powdery mildew, which is a disease that we have that you guys don't have to worry about. But anyway, it washes off in the processing. But this is much slower because he's actually sorting as he goes. He's sorting out the cracked fruit. Because we pay our pickers by the pound, it's really advantageous for them to pick a lot and pick it quickly. And if a grower is asking the pickers to sort the cherry as he picks, they will give them a raise in price of how many, what they're getting paid per pound because they're having to do it at a slower pace. They compensate them for that. But the pickers have to make minimum wage. If they don't pick enough that it calculates out to be making so much a pound, then they will be assigned to a different job. So there is benefits to learn how to pick well and to make quite a bit of money. Oops, sorry. Okay, just as we talked about, temperature affects both fruit and stem quality due to an increase in respiration. And it's important to remember that we're thinking about the stem as well as the fruit. There's a lot of discussion going on now about how important is it to have the stem on the fruit. In some places, they're trying to get to a place where you don't need the stem because in reality, the stem if it doesn't have a good stem or the stem is missing, the fruit is still very good. So, but now, still, people like to see the stem. They like to look at the stem, and that's how they determine whether the fruit is fresh or not. So until we can get everybody's mindset to change, we still need to protect the stem. And during respiration, the fruit color will darken, the firmness is lost, and the acidity is lost, so flavor changes. People may think that their fruit actually is getting sweeter, but the problem is it's lost its acid. So then you're just tasting the sugar and you're not tasting that acid, which gives it the distinct cherry flavors that you may prefer. So the stem color deteriorates with this increase in respiration as well, and then decay, which may have started because of cuts in the skin tissue, will start to increase also. This is just to show you that another factor that's speeded up by temperature is transpiration. And that's the movement of water through the plant and into the air as water vapor. It's related to the vapor pressure deficits, where water vapor moves from an area of high relative humidity to one of low relative humidity. So think about cherry fruit. What makes up a cherry? A cherry is 85% water. So you can imagine inside that cherry, the humidity is approximately 100%. And so if the surrounding air is not at 100%, that water vapor the pressure is going to cause it to leave the cherry. And you don't want that to happen because, again, you're losing weight. And so your fruit becomes less profitable for you because you're losing it to the air. And in order to prevent that, we're going to talk about some different ways of preventing that. Here is a trial that was done. There are 4 treatments. This is, the first one is no tarp. These are cherries that were picked and kept for 4 hours inside of a shed that was at the orchard. There was no tarp or any covering of the cherries other than that they were harvested and put in the shed. And then the other ones were harvested and covered with a tarp. And you can see that the ones that were covered with the tarp lost a lot less moisture than the no tarp. But then the real problem arose when there was no tarp and they were kept for 4 hours under a tree. And then there was a tarp. But the problem is, what they want you to see especially is, don't put your cherries under a tree in hopes that that's going to keep them cool. The shade of a tree is not effective, and quite often you'll walk away, come back, and you realize, oh, that shade moved. My cherry has been sitting in the sun for the last hour, and then you're in trouble. So the maximum acceptable weight loss from orchard to consumer is 5%. And by going to consumer, that means all the way to the end of the processing business. So it not only is what happens in the orchard, what's happened in the packing house, what happens on the packing line. You're not supposed to allow your fruit to lose more than 5% of its weight, because at 5% is when they determine that the consumer can see that something's wrong with the cherries. The skin has lost its luster, it's no longer firm, and especially the stem will be showing the result of that. In fact, the stems lose their moisture 4 times faster than the fruit because they don't have the protective covering that cherries naturally provide for themselves. So what do you do about maintaining the humidity and the lower temperature? You harvest in the cool of the day. Now, I'm not sure what happens here. We are fortunate in the Pacific Northwest that our nights get a lot cooler in the summer than the day. I don't know, does your temperature stay the same or is it cooler? Does it get cooler here? Cooler? Well, that's a benefit, and think about that. So you want to try to pick when the cherries have had a chance to recover from the nighttime air, and so you pick early. Our pickers start at 5 o'clock in the morning, and then they pick as long as they can until the heat gets too high. If it's a cool day, they can pick 8 to 10 hours, depending on what they have to accomplish in that day. But if it gets to be the temperature gets to be above 32, you need to stop harvesting, regardless of when that is in the day. Because at 32, the tree starts to show stress. And trees are very determined to make themselves survive, and they want the leaves to recover, so the tree itself will take the moisture out of the cherry to put back into the leaves. And so you don't want to keep harvesting out there. You want to give the tree a chance to recover so that it doesn't steal water from the fruit. So remember that 32 is kind of a cutoff to when you need to quit harvesting on a day. And you keep the fruit cool and humidity around the fruit high. We're going to talk about that in just a minute, but I wanted to tell you about a new idea that growers in the Northwest are looking at. In the last 2 summers, we've had some extremely high temperatures. In 2021, we had 2 periods where we had 4 days of heat being at 47 degrees. That's a killer for cherries. And in fact, the cherries baked on the trees. It was incredible to see that. They were just shriveled up, or they were like cherry pie texture, so not good for packing. And then this last year, we had a couple of days, 2 times where it was 44, a little cooler, but still too hot. So what they have decided to try, and it worked really well, they're picking their cherries at night. Because for us, it's a possibility. The pickers all wear headlamps. And since we pick every tree clean, we pick all the fruit, we're not having to look for color. And so they just start picking them all, and they go through the night. They start at 3 in the morning, and then they stop at 10:30 in that morning. And what they have found was not only were they able to pick fruit with really good quality because it was cold, but the pickers themselves loved it because they were not exhausted by the heat themselves. Their productivity picked up even higher than it was, as you already saw. So they thought picking at night was a good thing. And so that's worked for the last 2 seasons. A couple of growers have tried it, and we'll see how far that expands as an idea this next year. And with the way the wacky weather is getting, it may be something that will become a more common practice. Here are some suggestions of how you can maintain humidity and lower temperature. You can use the far one is what they do in Chile. They use moistened foam pads. They cover the individual picking containers, and they put them in bins, and then they cover the bin with reflective tarp. In Canada, they use these tarps that were developed actually by the forestry agency in Canada, but they have reflective mylar type stuff on one side, and then the other side is white. Either way you put the tarp, you're going to reflect the heat, you're not going to absorb the heat. And they have found that if they cover their bins, they also put into large bins, they can leave their cherries up to 4 hours in the orchard, and it isn't making a difference. If you don't do that, you really need to try to get your fruit out of the orchard within 2 hours, between 2 and 4 hours. This is just a test to show you how important it is to cover your fruit instead of just leaving it out in the orchard. This is a trial where, this is Lapham's cherries, as you see. They took one set of the fruit and left it uncovered in the orchard, just sitting out maybe in the picking boxes. And then this one, they put all the picking boxes under a tarp. And then they left them the same amount of time, but then when they took them in, they handled them all the same way. They processed them the same way, packed them, put them in cold storage for 4 weeks, and then they pulled them out, and then they could tell right then which ones had been uncovered in the orchard. That damage never recovered. It didn't recover by going through a hydrocooler. It just did not recover. And so you need to recognize that once it's damaged in the orchard, anything you do after that is not going to make it any better. So you can see, especially the stem damage on that far left one, you can hardly see the stems because they're all black. And then over here, look at the quality of the stems. So it really is important to try to figure out how to protect your fruit in that time between when you picked it and when you get it out of the orchard. The least you can do is build a shade covering for your fruit. Put your bins under something where you put shade cloth over it, and you have a place that you have set apart for that, and all the fruit is put there while you're waiting for the transport to your holding facility. And this bottom one is just just showing you an easy display of what happens to stems. If the two on the right were covered or put into protection, the two on the left were left in the sun, and then the stems were ruined. But fruit temperatures, it says, increases as much as 5 degrees in 6 minutes. That's not very much time that you have to not have your fruit covered. So get it into protection. And as we said before, shade moves. Now you need to transport your fruit to a holding facility. Like I say, I think 4 hours is a little long unless you've had a tarp over it, but 2 hours is better. Get it to fruit wherever you're going to cool it as soon as possible. You need to be putting it in a truck that has a refrigerated system, but remember that refrigerator is not cooling the fruit. It's just preventing it from getting any hotter. It takes a lot of time to cool the fruit itself. That has to be done in the ways that we're going to look at in a minute. But for every hour that you keep your harvested fruit in the orchard, you're losing a day of shelf life at the other end. So remember that. Get it out of the orchard as quickly as you can. And then when you transport, you need to be able to transport quickly, so you need decent roads. And you need to be able to have smooth surfaces so that the fruit is not jostled around. When you're putting your fruit in the container, which was pretty nice of them to do that, but you can, smooth out your unpaved roads. You can improve your vehicle suspension, or you can use underinflated tires to give a more even ride. When we were in South Africa, they had a novel idea for testing their roads. I thought was pretty fun. They would take an ashtray like this, or one that was still in the car, if their car still has ashtrays, and they would put marbles. You know what marbles are? Yeah. They would fill the ashtray with marbles. They would set it on the dashboard of their vehicle and then drive, and then see how the cherries responded. If they're bouncing all over the place, that's what's happened to your fruit in the back of your vehicle. So you need to think about what you can do to make that. And every time they get bounced, there's damage being done. So think about that. Now we're going to look at 3 ways to remove that field heat from the cherries. The first way, you can put your fruit, just put it in a cool room. The cool room needs to be at 0, and just let it sit there for a while. That's really the least effective way. It's going to take, that does not really get the fruit cooled. You're wanting to get the fruit down to 10 centigrade, and so that's not going to happen in room cooling unless you leave it there for like days. And even then, you're losing the quality of the fruit by doing that. Sometimes you have to use room cooling if you're going to run a fruit like Skeena through a hydrocooler. Skeena does not do hydrocoolers well. It will crack. So what you do is when you bring it in, you do put it in the cold room, you leave it there at a max 24 hours, and then you run it on the processing line at 10, with the water there at 10 centigrade. Forced air cooling can be used on unpacked fruit, but you risk drying of stems. So normally, forced air cooling is used for the final cooling of packed fruit, and it's very, very effective. In fact, this didn't used to happen, but now in the United States, every fruit, even if it's been hydrocooled at the beginning, it will be packed at 10, and then it will be forced air cooled to 0 before it's shipped. Because that's really the only way that you can get all of the fruit down to the temperature that you need, which is 0. Hydrocooling is the quickest way to remove field heat, and that's where you have the water chilled to 0, and then you have a rain, a shower over the fruit. But it requires potable water and sanitation practices, which you would have to manage. And here's just a picture of fruit. This fruit could be cooled a little bit better if they had pulled the crates apart and then stacked them so that
so that more of the fruit is exposed, because when there's no air movement in there, you're not getting the fruit cooled. And the room would also need to be at like 95 or 99% relative humidity. Here's a cold room after the fruit has been hydrocooled. They're keeping it in a cold room, and that's okay because they're going to run it within 48 hours, and that works out well that way too. Here's a couple of different hydrocoolers. There's the garage style, which works well for a small operation. You load your crates up, stack them for 48 crates. 8-kilogram crates can fit into this. You stack them, you water, have your water around 1 or 0. And what you need to do, which is a really good practice, is that take the temperature of your fruit when it arrived. I think people don't realize how warm their fruit is when it's coming in from the field. This fruit was 26 degrees. And then they put it in the hydrocooler. They let the hydrocooler run for 12 minutes in order to get it to 10, around 10. But the problem is 12 minutes is almost too long. You're starting to be worried about cracking when you get up to be that high. You really want to aim for around 6 to 8 minutes max. So on this hydrocooler, so what they need to do, if they can't get that many crates cooled, they need to lessen the height of their stack. And then try it again with another stack and see if you can get it cooled in less than 12 minutes, if it doesn't have to go through that much fruit. In this one, you're putting in 2 parallel, crates and letting it run through. And in this one, you can either speed up or slow down the rate that they're going through in order to achieve the temperature that you want to achieve. And then there's the forced air cooling, which is where you're relying on a pressure gradient to pull cold air through boxes. And it's usually used, like I said, with packed boxes. So you're having to pull it through boxes that have cherries that are inside a plastic bag, inside a cardboard box. And so you have to have a really good system of where you have a very cold room and you're pulling that cold air through, either recycling it then, like in the first one, that's the one being built. The fan is going to go in that opening at the bottom. The air is sent up through a refrigerated system, comes back out, cools the room, and then is being pulled through a row, like a column through the tunnel of a column of boxes. The middle one is a portable one that works really well also for small systems in a cold room. But these are the fastest, most efficient ways to do it. If you try to use a non-passive system with packed boxes, it can take 200 hours just sitting in a cold room for them to get cold. That's way too long. So you need to think about what choice works best for you. Well, in conclusion, I just want to say that the most important thing, as you probably guessed in handling your fruit, is that you're trying to keep the temperature down. You have to figure out how to keep the respiration rate from speeding up, the transpiration rate from speeding up. So temperature management is the very most important thing you can do. And as it says, you can combine, you have to think about post-harvest because you've spent all that time learning how to grow a good cherry. And if you don't spend the same amount of time learning how to manage your fruit, when you get to harvest, it's all for naught. So try to become a good grower, try to become a good post-harvest person, and you will reap the reward. Thank you.